Welcome back to our series of lectures on qualitative research, and you have reached the final series from our class at SIUE. And again, my name is Sean Jordan. I am the research director at the Research and Planning Group. I'm a qualitative researcher, and I'm also going to take you through a little bit of discussion about the future of qualitative research, as well as talking about what we learned in this course. So if you have not watched the previous lecture videos, you might want to do that first. I want to begin by talking about something that is very exciting at the time of this recording, and that is the future of virtual reality. Now, when I was a kid, virtual reality was a big, exciting new buzzword, and in fact, there were even virtual reality arcades that you could go to in the early 90s. I remember there was one at Union Station in St. Louis where you would go in and you would see people strapped in with these big helmets on their head, and you could see on the screen the games that they were playing, and they would tell you that what they were experiencing was just something unlike they'd ever gone through before. I begged and pleaded with my mom to let me do it. I was just a kid. She said it was too expensive and she thought it was too scary, the idea of being in a virtual world, and wouldn't let me do it. But I'd always been enchanted by the idea, and many people have, and virtual reality is about to make a big comeback this year. And the product that you see here on the screen is called the Oculus Rift, and it's one of several different VR headsets that are going to be widely available this year, allowing people to not just play video games or enter into virtual worlds, but to enter into them in a way that puts the sight and sound and motion of their bodies into these worlds in a new and exciting way. Well, the thing about virtual reality is that, a year or two from now, once this tech has been out for a little while and people have had a chance to play with it, it may not be as big a deal as it might seem at the moment. And I say that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I am someone who is very passionately devoted to video gaming and to other forms of electronic entertainment. And I just know for a fact that the more active that you make the experience of participating in electronic entertainment, the less interested people are in it because it just wears them out too quickly. The other thing that I have learned is that technology rarely works as well as promised. And, if you think back to the Nintendo Wii 10 years ago, the Nintendo Wii was a huge deal when it first came out. It was a game system that came out that had these remote control-like controllers that you could use for motion tracking. And so you could play baseball or tennis or do boxing or things like that on the screen very easily. But yet, a few years after the Wii had came out, and the first year the Wii came out, it was nearly impossible to find. But a few years after it came out, people were really bored with the concept. Wii's they were in a lot of households. I think they sold over 90 million of them, but a lot of people just had them sitting there collecting dust. It was a toy for the kids, but it wasn't something that they took seriously. It wasn't something that they bought a lot of software for, and it wasn't something that they really cared to play anymore, other than just for the novelty of getting it out every now and then. So this is a cautionary tale for us in the realm of thinking about the future, because things like the Oculus Rift seem to be very futuristic and exciting, and yet, as the past has proven time and time again, when something is new and exciting, it usually remains that only until people begin to understand the limitations of it. And as we talk about the future of qualitative research in this lecture, I just want you to keep in mind how many times things have come that were going to be the next big thing, and it's turned out that they not only weren't the next big thing, but they've not been able to replace very simple things that people have been using for a long time. So, first of all, I want you to understand that qualitative research, just as a practice, is increasingly becoming a component of quantitative research. And you see this happening in a few ways. One of them is taking qualitative ideas and putting them into quantitative surveys. And this has been particularly accessible through online surveys, where the fact that a computer is administering the survey means that you can do a lot more than you used to be able to do with traditional paper surveys or mail surveys. So there are a lot of qualitative techniques that are growing more and more acceptable to use in quantitative research, and you get a lot of what you call mixed mode research, where you have both quant and qual kind of working together. I actually do a lot of mixed mode surveys, especially in the business to business context, because I'm often talking to people that are very difficult to get in an interview: physicians, executives, high level managers, people like that. And so when I get them, I have to make sure that I get as much information out of them as possible, because I'm not going to be able to talk to them again for another year or two and get the information that I need, because they often come from a really small sample, they're really highly qualified, and they don't like to participate in surveys very often. So mixed mode is great for ensuring that I can get the strengths and weaknesses of both qualitative and quantitative into the same survey process. And obviously in those techniques I'm going to apply mostly things that I've learned from in-depth interviewing into my quantitative surveys. But I generally have to have a human being administering these surveys, because the qualitative component requires probing, requires discussion, requires detail, and you just can't get that from a pure online survey, as much as I would like to, and I have tried many times. Another method that is used with online surveys is to use a platform such as Qualtrics that allows for branching and embedded codes and things like that to give participants either a quantitative or a qualitative experience, and then to compare the two experiences against each other. So a very simple example might be, if I'm doing a satisfaction survey, I might ask most of the people that participate in the survey to go through the quantitative survey, but then have a subset of maybe 30 or 40 people randomly selected to go through a qualitative version where I ask the same questions, but I ask them in an open-ended fashion, and then I compare the results. This is really good for validating quantitative research because it gives you some verbal data to go against. It's also good for making sure you didn't miss anything, so it can be a really useful step for a pilot process. The danger of going through this, however, is, first of all, particularly if you're working with research panels, qualitative surveys take a lot longer for people to fill in detail, so it can be a little bit more difficult to get people to complete the survey. And also, I have just found, because people are taking these surveys a lot of times on their phone, or they're taking them when they have a few minutes, or they're just really aggravated about having to take a long survey, they give really short answers. And so online research does not bode very well for good quality of qualitative data. And unless you put a word limit or something like that on there to make them have to give more substantial answers, they generally won't. There's also very little opportunity to probe. You have to program in any kind of probes that you want to do to look for keywords or things like that, and that can be difficult as well. So even though these two things are coming together in a lot of ways, it still ultimately works best when a human being is administering the survey. But with that said, the future of qualitative research involves finding ways to replicate its depth in a way that machines can easily analyze. And I want you to take this very seriously, because what is going to make or break you as a qualitative researcher 10 or 20 years down the road is your ability to look for ways to automate the process of qualitative research the same way that quantitative research has been automated so capably. And the reason for that is because clients and end users of information get tired of waiting weeks and weeks and weeks for qualitative analysis to come back. It's difficult to them. They like to make decisions. They don't like to be held up by waiting for good information. And so they're going to want to see quicker results from qualitative research. So it's going to be up to you to find ways to work within the confines of what machine learning can do, and computer programs that are designed with machine learning can help you handle. Because ultimately, if you're not able to deliver qualitative research in in days rather than in weeks, you're going to find that fewer and fewer clients are going to want to work with you on qualitative projects. And that's just a sad reality, but it is what it is. And our job as researchers is not just to adhere to the skill sets that we have, but also to find ways to adapt those skill sets to the modern needs for information. The gateway to the future of qualitative research is likely mobile. And I want you to think really, really carefully about any of these kind of devices, any kind of cell phone, tablet, mobile device that people carry around with them. These things not only carry a wealth of information just in what's going on in their day-to-day lives, but they also can provide users with a lot of opportunities to participate in research in ways that are just now kind of being explored. And in fact, no one yet has a handle on how to use mobile effectively as a qualitative platform, but there are some ideas that have been tried. A few emerging ideas for qualitative research. These are just a few. And these are not always the names that they specifically go by. These are just names that I've selected for the purpose of this lecture. But one is a digital video diary. And this one makes a lot of sense if you're thinking about people holding a cell phone. They can take their cell phone and they can record short videos talking you through whatever it is you want to learn about. So let's say you're doing a story about how they shop at the grocery store. They can pull out their cell phone and put on the selfie cam and show you what they're doing and talk you through it and kind of give you some ideas on how they're looking at things and how they're making purchase processes and things like that. The great thing about this is that this gives you kind of a pseudo-ethnographic style of data. You give them some prompts, you tell them what to do, they use their existing hardware, and they give you a lot of insight into how they do things. And it gives an excellent participant level perspective as well, especially if you instruct them to use a selfie cam so that you can see them, you can hear their voice, you can see their face, they can point at the things that they think are important. And it gives you some data that are really easy to understand. Also, if they're able to upload these to YouTube or something, I mean, you can have these data immediately. The drawbacks, first of all, bias towards the outgoing and the tech savvy. So you have to be a certain kind of person to want to participate in a digital video diary. You need to be someone who is confident enough in technology and confident enough in yourself to be able to do that. And that may not be representative of all of the people that you could include in the project. So one of the realities of ethnography is that it's up to the ethnographer to select who participates in the study, and ideally they should select people that are and are not outgoing so they get a good mix. But with this kind of a method, you're only going to really get people that are outgoing. Also, participants filter what they show. So they're not going to show you things that are unflattering unless they think it's interesting and they want to show you. They're going to show you things that reflect on them in a positive way more often of the time. So keep that in mind, that the data are going to be heavily limited by the fact that they are the ones collecting them. Also, participants can quickly grow bored and cease participating, and that's a really important point to think about with digital video diaries, is that the drop-off rate can be quite high, even if you're paying them. In fact, you should be paying them to give you any kind of data like that with that amount of detail. So with the drop-off rate being high, that means that a lot of the data that you're going to get initially, you're going to have to decide what to do with, and they may not go deep enough for you to really be able to use them. So you have to really think carefully about how you want to design that study to keep people from getting bored. Okay, another emerging idea for qualitative research is a web-based Delphi discussion. Now, a Delphi discussion is just very simply allowing experts to talk to one another. So basically you interview an expert, and then you show the other experts what that person had to say, and you let them respond to what that person had to say, and then maybe you let them respond to what that second person had to say, and so on down the line. And traditionally, this is done in a very, very slow process. But it can be done really quickly and easily with the web. And in fact, you'll see a lot of articles on this on the web where they'll just get a roundup of experts. They'll start it off with a prompt and then have them write and then have them respond to each other and talk about whatever their topic of interest is. And it can make for a really engaging and interesting article when you see people that really know what they're talking about having a discussion. And in fact, it's kind of like a pseudo focus group. It often can provide high levels of engagement and knowledge, particularly if these people are really experts in their field. And it can go on for days or weeks if they get really engaged by it. But the problem is, these kind of discussions tend to result in people taking sides and arguing minutiae. And minutiae are very interesting to a researcher. They're not very interesting to anybody else. And even to a researcher, they can become tedious after a while. And the danger of minutiae is that you can focus a little bit too much on trying to explain the nuance of them and miss the bigger themes. So minutiae are a danger of anytime you have experts having a discussion about anything. Less verbose voices are often drowned out. So people that have a lot less to say or who aren't able to articulate things as well or as effectively are going to get drowned out by the people that can. And that's another big danger in a Delphi discussion, is that what appears to be expertise sometimes is just someone talking really often or really loudly. And then finally, engagement of those with lower expertise is often lower. So this makes sense when you think about it. If you get a bunch of experts in the room and you have a few people that clearly know what they're talking about and the rest of the people only kind of know what they're talking about, they're going to let the people with the highest level of expertise speak the most. Or they're going to affirm what those people say because they too are trying to learn from them. So definitely keep that in mind. Make sure that you have people that are on fairly equal footing, and that you find ways to engage those with lower expertise by asking them direct prompts or direct questions to ensure that they can give you good information as well. By the way, All of these methods that I'm mentioning work very well with research panels. These are all methods that you can recruit people from panels, expert communities or respondent communities, and they work quite well. Okay, the third is chat room IDIs, and that's quick and easy in-depth interview format. It's immediately transcribed because it's done in a chat room rather than through a webcam or some other verbal type of communication. And they're kind of nice because participants have time to think carefully about answers as they type. And I'll also mention the vendors that provide these have told me that they can often be doing 3 or 4 of these chats at a time because it's so slow. People have time to think about what they're saying, so they can run several of these, and it makes the process of data collection a lot faster. The drawbacks, complete loss of nonverbal data. So you don't get any emotional cues, you don't get any facial expressions, nonverbal data that indicate body language. You don't get to hear tone. You don't get to hear pauses or annoyance in their voice or anything like that. You just don't get that stuff. Also, people write differently than they speak, and it alters their voice. This is a problem that I have. When I write, I tend to write with a much more authoritative style than I do when I speak. If you actually hear me speak, you understand that I'm a much friendlier person than I might come across in my writing. So understanding that difference in voice is key, but you don't really get a sense of that from a chat room in-depth interview. And how people sound online often is different from how they sound as real people. Chat room IDIs also tend not to get as deep of information from participants, particularly those who are not good at writing or typing their ideas. People who struggle with articulating words struggle even more when you put a keyboard in front of them and have them start to type them out. It just brings back bad memories of English classes and things like that they've struggled with, and they can have a difficult time participating. So again, you're either going to get some selection bias, or you're going to get people that just don't give you a lot of good detail. And both of those things can be really dangerous for qualitative research. Finally, let's think about observational research, and there is an emerging field of web-based observation using either primary or secondary media. And let me just explain what I mean by that. So right now, at this point in history, we have an unprecedented amount of information that people are putting up about themselves online. And it's about anything you can possibly imagine, and it's all there, and it's ready to be analyzed. And in fact, we will probably never get around to even coming close to analyzing most of it. So you have all these things that people are putting up, or they're talking about their favorite brands or their favorite products or their favorite categories or what they like to do or how they live their lives or things like that. And they're putting them up not just in written format, but they're putting them up in video format and in picture format and in social media where they're having discussions with people, and they're just all kinds of different areas and ways that you can observe people. So what's really cool is that you can observe these things without them ever even knowing that they're being observed. They put that information out there. They wanted the public to know it, and now you can observe it, and you can draw conclusions about it. You can write up on it, and it's extremely unobtrusive. So you're getting as close to watching people in the wild as you possibly could, and you're still, understanding that you're looking at them in a social setting that's online, and that they are trying to control their online persona, and they want to come across as a certain kind of person, but it's still really cool. There's a lot of ability to get good information with them knowing that they're being observed by the public, but not thinking about being observed in a research context. Okay, so unobtrusive is a big deal. There's also a wealth of available secondary sources, and I'm not just talking about social media and YouTube videos here, because we are in the age of live streaming. Now, if you're not familiar with live streaming yet, you will be soon, because it's becoming a bigger and bigger deal. And think about apps like Periscope or Livestreamer or Ustream, Twitch. These are all tools that allow you to see into people's lives in real time. And people will use these tools for all kinds of things. I remember when the Ferguson protests were going on a couple of years ago, one of the ways that I was able to be connected, even when I wasn't able to be out there, was watching via live stream. And people that were actually out there protesting would hold up their phones and live stream and broadcast what was going on. And it was fascinating. It gave a very different perspective of what was going on during those protests than you were ever able to see from the news media, who filtered everything. Also, in becoming connected just with social communities of people that use those kinds of tools, I found that people will live stream the weirdest things. They'll live stream funerals, they'll live stream birthday parties, they'll live stream just having dinner with someone because they want to show off the food that they're eating. They'll live stream video game playing. There's a lot of that going on online. People love to live stream video game playing. They'll live stream just playing with their pets. I mean, just anything you can imagine, people are live streaming. So there are tons and tons of sources that you can observe, and you can learn a lot just from watching those sources. Also, when you have a research team working on an observational project, they can get, you can have way too many people around, and they can't really actively participate in observation together because it just crowds out the observation. So with web-based observation, many researchers can participate simultaneously, and this is valuable because you can have a check against individual bias. You can have several researchers work together. You can have a different form of triangulation, which is based on taking all their different perspectives together and merging them into a common set of themes. And you can really begin to understand what you're observing from a level that goes far beyond the individual perspective. Okay, so here are some problems. Video distances observers. When you're watching something on video, it's not the same as watching it in person. And I know you might feel like it's the same, but just think about when you're watching this lecture, how different it is from being in class. When you're in class, you're forced to pay attention. You're forced to pretend like you care about what it is I have to say. When you are watching these videos, you can respond audibly and I can't hear you. You can be doing other things and I can't see you. I'm not going to call on you and ask you if you actually understood something. You're just going to process it differently. And it is different. I'm a two-dimensional person in this lecture, whereas I'm a three-dimensional person when you see me live. And that's the problem with observation, is that those two-dimensional people on your screen become more like characters in a TV show, not a very entertaining TV show, but a TV show nonetheless, and less like real people. And so you have to constantly remind yourself that you have a bias there. Also, secondary sources are often filtered in less obvious ways. So back to my Ferguson protest, for example. When I was seeing the live streams of what was going on in those protests, I was always seeing it from the perspective of people who were embedded in the protests. I was not seeing it from the perspective of the police. The police wouldn't have dared to live stream what was going on because they didn't want to give away any of the things that they were doing because they were going out and arresting people. So anytime any kind of movement was going on, it was always from the perspective of the people that were participating in the protest. And that meant that my observation was limited to a point of view that was more sympathetic to what they were doing, or at least was more sympathetic to their point of view as an observer. That's difficult because it means that you don't always get a well-rounded picture, and you don't always know how things are being filtered so that you are seeing things that are real. So you have to be very careful about that. Also, reduced ability to ask in-the-moment questions of subjects is a big deal. It's difficult if you're observing something and you're trying to be unobtrusive to ask why. And you can do that in certain types of observational contexts, but it's hard to do it online without popping in and saying, hey, I've been observing you, and can I ask you some questions for the purposes of research? People tend to get really jittery when you start asking them questions like that. They put all this information out to the public, but then when a researcher steps up and starts asking them, well, why are you doing the things you're doing? They're not always eager to answer. So you just have to be aware of all of those things. New qualitative techniques come and go out of style, but there is a consistent demand for in-depth interviews and focus groups. And this is affirmed every year. There is this thing called the GRIT, the Green Report Industry Trends. It's a newsletter that goes out every year. And the GRIT every year affirms that in qualitative research, no matter how excited people might be about neuromarketing, or how excited they might be about bulletin board focus groups, or how excited they might be about online video camera focus groups, or telephone focus groups, or any of these other things that we do, they tend to consistently demand in-depth interviews and focus groups in that order. And this is just kind of a cautionary point to remind you, never be so awestruck by a new method that you forget about the client's desire to understand your data collection techniques. Because the reason IDIs and focus groups are still so highly preferred is not because they give the best possible data necessarily. It's because clients understand them, and the data are extremely transparent to them, and they can understand what they're looking at in ways that they can't through some of those more exotic methods. And so the more exotic methods are interesting, advertising agencies in particular really love them. They find them to be really cutting edge and unique, and to give them insights that they might not have gotten before. It's also something that there's kind of a perceived capability. Research firms sometimes are looked down on for providing interviews or focus groups because those are simple. Anybody can do those, right? And but these more exotic techniques, no, we can't do those. We need a research firm that can help us with those. Well, the truth is, it's actually really hard to be a good interviewer or a good focus group moderator, and you do need a research firm to do those things. But these more exotic techniques are even more questionable and dangerous sometimes because they're not as well tested. They're not as well, the people that are doing them are not as well trained. A lot of times they're still developing the method and still trying to understand how it works. So, it might appear sometimes like these exotic methods are really exciting and enticing and that they bring value to what the research firm can do. But at the same time, because they're so untested, they don't always get that great of data. So just don't be so awestruck by them. They tend to come and go out of fashion. They tend to come back in new ways, especially when a computer is added into the mix. And then they tend to go away just as quickly when people realize that they're not getting that much of useful data from them. Just beware. With that said, that's my lecture on the future of qualitative research. I hope this has been useful and interesting for you. And I want to encourage you, if you'd like to learn more about this topic, to keep reading, if anything, Quirk's Marketing Research Review, which we've used heavily in this class. Quirk's is where a lot of articles tend to show up about these different methods, and there are many, many more that I haven't covered. I would love to, but we would be here for hours. And some of them are interesting from a technical point of view, but probably not going to be that interesting to you as a student. So with that said, in our next lecture, we're going to wrap up this class. We're going to talk about what we've learned, and hopefully you will remember some things that you'd forgotten as we talk about what to make of everything we've been through in these lectures.